He walked into that bar hoping to disappear for just one night. But when a gang of bikers mocked him like he was nothing, Denzel Washington didn't say a word. He just took it. Until one of them reached for his face. That's when the door creaked open, and a legend stepped inside. What happens next will leave you questioning who was really being hunted, and why two of America's most silent warriors were there at the exact same time. What if this bar brawl was never about the fight, but about who they were there to find? Denzel Washington hadn't told anyone where he was going. He left the city behind without so much as a text. No security. No assistant. No plan. Just his truck, a worn backpack, and a single goal: find peace, even if it was just for one night. He'd been carrying something heavy for weeks. Not guilt, not shame, just weight. The kind you can't see, but feel. Fame had a funny way of making him feel both admired and invisible at the same time. People either worshipped him or ignored him. But here, in this small speck of a town in the Midwest, he hoped he could just be the guy at the end of the bar. No cameras. No interviews. Just silence. The bar he found was straight out of a movie. Faded neon beer signs buzzed weakly in the windows. Country music played low from a jukebox in the corner. The bartender, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and stiff joints, gave him a nod but didn't pry. That was perfect. He took a stool at the far end, ordered a black coffee and a glass of water, and stared ahead. He didn't even look at his phone. He didn't need distractions. He just needed stillness. Outside, the wind howled through the empty streets. The town looked like it hadn't changed in 40 years. Denzel liked that. Everything now was fast and loud and shallow. But this place, this dusty bar, felt like a pause in time. He let his shoulders drop for the first time in weeks. For a while, nothing happened. And that was a good thing. But like in every story that begins with peace, it wasn't going to last. It started with the distant rumble. Not thunder. Not a truck. Something more raw. It grew louder, closer, until it was right outside. Then came the sound of boots hitting gravel. Several of them. The bar's door creaked open with the sound of wood protesting metal hinges. 5 men walked in, leather vests, chains, sunglasses inside. Bikers. Not the friendly weekend kind. The loud, bored, looking for trouble kind. They brought with them the stench of exhaust and sweat and stale beer. The music from the jukebox stopped. One of them kicked the side of the machine. The bartender straightened up but didn't speak. Denzel stayed seated. He didn't look over. He knew better. But the leader of the pack, a tall man with a scraggly grey beard and a skull tattoo on his neck, did a double take when he saw Denzel. He squinted. "You one of them actors?" he asked loud enough for everyone to hear. Denzel didn't respond. That wasn't his plan. He wasn't here to be anyone but a man drinking his coffee. The other bikers laughed. One elbowed the other. "Too good to talk to us," the second biker said, stepping closer. Denzel still didn't flinch. But his silence wasn't taken well. These weren't the type to let go of something once they decided it was worth poking. The bartender nervously reached for her phone under the counter. Denzel noticed it. So did the bikers. "Relax, lady," one of them growled. "We're just saying hi." But everyone in that bar knew that wasn't true. Denzel could feel it building. That tension in the air when something is about to snap. He didn't want a scene. He didn't want to hurt anyone. But sometimes, trouble walks in and doesn't care what you want. Sometimes, trouble sees a quiet man and thinks that means weak. He took a sip of his coffee and set the cup down slowly. Still no words. Still no reaction. But inside, he was already measuring the distance between him and the door. Between him and the bartender. Between him and the danger. Outside, the wind kept howling. Inside, the storm was just beginning. The leader of the biker gang leaned against the bar like he owned the place. His boots scraped against the wooden floor as he stared Denzel down. There was a mocking smile on his face, the kind that said he was used to getting what he wanted and crushing anyone who got in his way. Denzel didn't move. He just kept his eyes on the empty glass in front of him, the coffee now cold. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He wasn't here to fight. But something told him this group wouldn't let it go. They had picked him out the second they walked in, like dogs sniffing out weakness. Only they were dead wrong. The biker leader tapped the bar and shouted for a round of whiskey. The others laughed and slapped the counter, their voices echoing through the quiet room. The bartender moved slowly, her hands shaking just a little. She was scared, and it showed. Denzel caught her eye for a second. He gave a subtle nod, telling her it would be okay, though he wasn't sure it would. He could feel the storm closing in around him. The men were loud, drunk, or pretending to be, and full of something worse than alcohol: pride, boredom, and anger. One of them walked behind Denzel, pretending to look at the jukebox, but he was too close. His boots scuffed against Denzel's stool. Another one leaned against the bar next to him, stretching his arm out so close it brushed against Denzel's shoulder. These were warning signs, tests. They were trying to get a reaction. When they didn't get one, the leader laughed again. "Too good for us, huh?" he said. "That's the problem with you Hollywood types. Think you're better than regular people." Denzel still didn't speak. His silence was his shield. But they mistook it for fear. The man behind him kicked the back of his stool just enough to knock it slightly forward. Denzel's hand stayed still on the bar. The biker to his right pulled out a toothpick and began picking at his teeth like he was settling in for a show. Another voice chimed in from across the room. "Hey, I think I saw him in that movie where he cries like a baby." More laughter. It was growing louder now, feeding on itself. Denzel could feel the eyes on him, could feel the bartender's fear rising. No one else was in the bar anymore. Just him, the bikers, and the tension building like steam in a sealed pipe. The one behind him walked forward and dropped his arm hard on the bar, making the glass shake. "You know what I hate?" he said loudly. "People who think they're better than everyone else. Think they can just sit there, all quiet, acting like they don't see us. Like we're dirt." His voice had turned sharp. He was looking for a fight now. The room had gone from teasing to threatening in the space of a minute. Denzel slowly turned his head. His eyes met the biker's for the first time. Calm. Steady. Unafraid. That stare was enough to make the man pause for half a second, but pride wouldn't let him back down. He slammed his palm on the bar. "Say something, man. Say one word." Denzel didn't flinch. "No," he said, his voice low and clear. It was the first word he had spoken since they walked in, and it dropped like a rock into a quiet lake. Everything stilled for a beat. Then came the fake laughter, loud and forced. "No. That's all you got. What are you, a monk?" another one said, stepping closer. One of the bikers picked up Denzel's empty glass and poured a bit of his beer into it. Then he took a long, exaggerated sip and slammed it back down. "Now it's full." "You're welcome," he said with a sneer. It splashed across the counter. Denzel didn't move. But inside, something was beginning to shift. The bartender finally found her voice. "You boys need to settle down," she said nervously. "This isn't that kind of place." But that only made it worse. The leader turned toward her. "We're just having fun, lady. What, you picking sides now?" His voice dropped, and there was venom behind it. Denzel stood up. The move was slow, controlled. No anger. No panic. He just stood. All the bikers backed up slightly, surprised. Denzel wasn't tall like them, but there was something in his posture, in the way he stood. It said he wasn't afraid. It said he'd been through worse. He looked at the bartender. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Then he turned back toward the gang. "You want something from me," he said. "But I don't think you know what you're asking for." The room was dead quiet now. The fake laughter stopped. The leader stepped forward. "We're asking for respect." Denzel's eyes didn't waver. "Respect isn't given to bullies. You want a fight. But if I give it to you, you won't walk out the same." The man's smirk twitched, just slightly. There was a flicker of doubt, of confusion. Was this guy serious? Who did he think he was? Another biker reached for Denzel's collar. And that's when the door swung open. The air changed. Even before anyone turned around, something felt different. Like a shadow had passed through the room. The laughter, the threats, the noise, It all died in an instant. Denzel didn't even have to look. He knew. Chuck Norris had just stepped inside. For a moment, nobody turned to see who had come through the door. It was as if the whole bar took one silent breath, frozen in time. The tension was already high, ready to snap, and the creak of that old wooden door felt like the match hitting the fuse. Denzel didn't flinch. He kept his gaze on the biker with the beer-soaked glass in front of him. The man still had his hand hovering in the air, just inches from Denzel's collar. His fingers were trembling slightly now. He didn't know why. He hadn't looked back yet. But something inside him, some primal instinct, was telling him the energy in the room had changed for good. Then the door clicked shut behind the figure. Slow boots echoed across the wooden floor. One by one, the bikers turned their heads. When they finally saw who had walked in, their eyes widened, and the confidence on their faces drained like water from a broken glass. Standing there, calm and solid as a mountain, was Chuck Norris. His face was older than most remembered, lined with age and time, but his posture was straight, his eyes razor-sharp, and his presence spoke louder than any weapon ever could. He didn't wear a smile. He didn't need to. His silence was the warning. The leader of the gang took a small step back, confused but trying not to show it. He looked Chuck over like he didn't believe what he was seeing. "Who the hell are you supposed to be?" he asked, but his voice cracked halfway through the question. Chuck didn't answer right away. He just walked past the men, calm as ever, and took a slow seat at the bar a few stools away from Denzel. He didn't even glance at the bikers. He looked straight ahead and said no. That should have been enough. It was the first time the gang had been spoken to like that. Not shouted at. Not threatened. Just told. Plain and direct. The leader scoffed. "You think you're gonna come in here and tell us how to act?" Chuck didn't reply. The silence pressed on them harder than any threat could have. The bartender stood frozen in place, one hand on the edge of the counter, knuckles white. The biker closest to Denzel, still clutching his shirt, tightened his grip. He didn't want to back down in front of the others. Pride was a heavy chain, and it kept pulling him deeper into the fire. "You should mind your business, old man," he growled. Chuck turned his head slowly. His eyes locked on the man's. "Calm. Steady. Cold. And you should move your hand," Chuck said. "Before I do it for you." Something about that sentence, it wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it carried weight. Real weight. The kind that makes your heart drop into your stomach. The biker released Denzel's collar slowly, unsure why he was even holding it in the first place. His hand fell to his side. Denzel straightened his shirt with a quiet flick of the wrist and sat back down without saying a word. But the leader of the gang was spiraling. He felt control slipping, and that made him dangerous. "This is our bar now," he said, louder. "We don't take orders from actors or has-been cowboys." He pointed at Chuck. "You think just 'cause you walk in here all quiet we're gonna roll over?" Chuck finally stood up again. He turned to face them, and the room somehow got even quieter. You could hear the old fan above the bar creak in slow circles. Chuck said, "No, I don't expect anything. But I will tell you this. If you take one more step in the wrong direction, I won't stop it. I won't warn you again." The leader took that step. He lunged forward, pushing past his own men, and reached out toward Chuck. The movement was fast, but not faster than Chuck. In one swift motion, Chuck grabbed the man's wrist, twisted it, and forced him to his knees with a simple, precise hold. The biker screamed as his arm bent in a direction it wasn't meant to. Chuck didn't flinch. He held the arm steady, looked him in the eyes, and said, "That was your choice." Another biker rushed forward, swinging a fist. Denzel stood this time. He intercepted the man with a smooth sidestep and a quick jab to the ribs. The biker crumbled to the floor, gasping. It was the first punch Denzel had thrown all night, and it landed like a hammer. The room erupted into chaos. Tables flipped. Glass shattered. The jukebox started playing again, somehow triggered by the fight, a broken country tune warbling under the sounds of fists and boots. Chuck spun, still calm, still focused. He moved with sharp, controlled strikes. He didn't waste a single step. One biker tried to hit him with a pool cue, but Chuck snapped it in half mid-swing and tossed the pieces aside like twigs. Denzel moved with quiet strength, knocking down 2 more men with swift, accurate punches that showed he wasn't just an actor. He was a man who had seen enough pain to know how to end it quickly. In less than 60 seconds, the bar was a mess. 4 of the bikers were on the ground groaning. 1 had fled out the back door. The leader was still on his knees, cradling his arm, eyes wide with fear and confusion. Chuck stepped back and looked at Denzel. For the first time, the 2 men really saw each other. Not just 2 strangers in the same room, but 2 men cut from the same cloth. Quiet. Strong. Tired. Denzel nodded once. Chuck nodded back. Then Chuck turned to the bartender, who had her phone in her hand but never got the chance to call. He said, "Sorry about the mess." She blinked a few times, then gave a shaky laugh. "I've seen worse," she said, though no one believed that. The bikers who could still stand scrambled to help the others out the door. Nobody said a word. No threats. No parting shots. They just left, dragging their pride with them. The bar was quiet again. Denzel sat back down. Chuck joined him. For a while, they said nothing. Then Denzel muttered, "You always show up at the right time." Chuck shrugged. "Sometimes," he said. "But not always by accident." And with that, the next chapter of the night began. The bar was a wreck. Broken glass sparkled across the floor like sharp snow. Tables were turned over, chairs cracked, and the jukebox sputtered out its last tune before falling silent again. The bikers were gone, scattered like scared dogs, and the only people left standing were the bartender, Denzel Washington, and Chuck Norris. The 2 men sat at the bar in silence, the weight of what had just happened still hanging in the air. Outside, the wind kept howling, like it knew the night wasn't done with them yet. Denzel finally looked over at Chuck, really looked. "You were here for a reason," he said, not as a question, but as a fact. Chuck didn't answer right away. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed and creased like it had been read too many times. He slid it across the bar. Denzel didn't pick it up, just stared at it. Chuck said, "His name is Staff Sergeant Miguel Reese. Last seen passing through this town 3 days ago." Denzel blinked. That name meant something to him. Not just a face on a file. Reese had served overseas, decorated, forgotten, then vanished after coming back. They had both been looking for him, but not together. Not until now. Denzel finally picked up the paper. It had a grainy photo and some handwritten notes. Chuck added, "I tracked him this far. Thought I'd find a trail. Instead, I found you." Denzel smirked slightly. Some coincidence. Chuck didn't smile. "It's not," he said. That word hung heavy. The bartender, still listening quietly, stepped away to sweep broken glass, giving them space. Chuck leaned in closer. "You were supposed to meet him in Dallas. He never showed." Denzel nodded. "I waited 2 hours. Then I started driving." Chuck said, "And ended up here. Same as me." The idea of fate wasn't something either man usually bought into. They believed in choices, in cause and effect. But tonight had too many pieces falling into place to ignore. Chuck pulled out a small notebook. Inside were dates, locations, symbols only someone trained would understand. He tapped one of the scribbled maps. This bar was marked. Denzel leaned in. Marked by who? Chuck hesitated. By him. Reese. It's his handwriting. That changed everything. Denzel looked around the bar now not as a place to hide, but as a clue. Why would Reese come here? Why leave a mark? And why disappear in a town where people barely knew each other's names? Chuck said, "I think he left it for someone. Maybe us. Maybe someone else." Denzel looked back at the bar's corner where the jukebox stood, now silent again. He got up and walked over, kneeling down to inspect it. Behind the side panel, scratched into the wood, was a symbol, one Denzel had seen before. Military. Old school. A silent signal, meant only for those who knew how to look. He turned back toward Chuck. He was here. Not long ago. Chuck joined him, eyes scanning the room like a soldier checking a perimeter. If he was here, Then he left in a hurry. Denzel nodded. Or was taken. That possibility was darker, and it brought a quiet stillness back into the room. Chuck stepped over broken chairs and approached the bartender. Did anyone else come in before the bikers? Someone alone. Quiet. Maybe limping. The woman paused, thinking. 2 nights ago, she said. Guy came in, didn't say much. Sat right where you're sitting now. Had a military coat on. Looked tired. Asked for a sandwich and water. Didn't even finish. Left when a pickup truck pulled up outside. Denzel leaned in. What kind of truck? She hesitated. Old Ford. Brown. No plates. That was enough. Chuck and Denzel exchanged a look. This wasn't random. Someone else was watching Reese. Someone who didn't want him found. Denzel asked, did he say anything? The bartender thought again. Just one thing. He looked at me and said, tell them I'm not crazy. That hit hard. Reese had been through war, then disappeared, and now he was leaving coded messages for the only 2 men who might understand. Chuck turned toward the door. We need to move. He's still out there. Denzel followed, but stopped before exiting. He turned to the bartender. If anyone else comes asking about him, don't say a word. Not until we come back. She nodded, her hand still shaking slightly as she swept. Outside, the cold night wrapped around them like a warning. The air smelled like snow and diesel. Chuck led the way to his truck, parked at the far end of the lot. In the back seat were maps, files, and photos. Denzel picked up one. It was a shot of Reese standing beside a small cabin. Chuck said, that's 20 miles north. Forest area. He was stationed there for rehab after his last deployment. Denzel looked at the photo. There was a shadow in the background. Not a person, not clearly. But something was off about the image. Chuck noticed too. I think someone's been following him for longer than we knew. They didn't need to speak more. Both men climbed into the truck, the engine rumbling to life. As they pulled out of the lot, the bar faded behind them. Inside, the jukebox sparked back on, unprompted, and played a soft, broken tune. But neither of them heard it. Their mission had just shifted. The fight at the bar was never the story. It was the distraction. The real danger lay ahead, in the woods, in the dark, where something or someone was waiting. The road out of town was narrow and lined with tall pine trees that leaned in close like they were trying to whisper secrets. Chuck drove without speaking, eyes locked ahead, hands firm on the wheel. Denzel sat in the passenger seat, flipping through the folder Chuck had handed him. Every page told a story of a man who had once served with honor and vanished with a secret. Reese had been decorated for bravery but came home different. He spoke less, watched more, and eventually slipped off the grid. What troubled Denzel now wasn't just that Reese had gone missing. It was the growing feeling that Reese knew something dangerous, something someone wanted buried. As they moved deeper into the forest, the cell signal vanished. The road turned from pavement to gravel and then to dirt. The truck bounced over roots and rocks, but neither man complained. They'd both been in worse places, in worse conditions. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was the silence of soldiers who understood that talking could wait. The wind whistled through the trees, and in the distance, an owl called out, then stopped short, like it had sensed something near. Chuck brought the truck to a stop in a small clearing. Ahead stood a run-down cabin, barely standing, its roof sagging, windows boarded up. Smoke no longer came from the chimney, and the door looked like it had been kicked in. Denzel stepped out first, scanning the tree line. Chuck followed, his hand resting lightly near his hip where he kept a small sidearm. Not drawn, but ready. The air was heavy, like it carried the weight of something left behind. Inside the cabin, it was cold and dark. The wooden floor creaked under their boots. A single chair lay tipped over near a fireplace filled with ash. On the table sat a tin cup and a half-burned candle. Chuck picked up the cup and sniffed it. Whiskey, he said. Old. A week, maybe less. Denzel checked a small drawer beside the bed and found a crumpled piece of paper. It was a letter, unfinished, scrawled in shaky handwriting. He read aloud, "They think I don't know what I saw. But I know. I saw the file. I saw the name. If they find me, it ends. Chuck asked, what file? Denzel shrugged. No clue. But someone didn't want him to finish this. There were no signs of a struggle, but there was something worse, a calm too perfect. It felt staged. Like someone wanted them to think Reese had left quietly. Denzel stepped outside to catch his breath. That's when he saw it. A trail. Faint. But there. Fresh tire tracks. Too narrow for a truck. Maybe a dirt bike. He called Chuck over. They followed it on foot, weaving through the trees, quiet and alert. Half a mile into the woods, they found the remains of a campfire. Still warm. Someone had been there recently. Nearby, they spotted a piece of torn fabric caught on a branch. Military grade. Chuck looked at Denzel. He's alive. But before they could celebrate, a snap echoed behind them. Not an animal. Too sharp. Too deliberate. They dropped to a crouch, scanning the trees. Another sound. Footsteps. Then silence. Chuck whispered, "We're not alone." A shadow moved behind a tree. Denzel stood slowly, raising his voice just enough to be heard. "Reese, if that's you, we're not here to hurt you. We came to help." More silence. Then, a voice, ragged, unsure. "I told them not to come. I told them to stay away." Reese stepped out, face thinner than they remembered, eyes wild. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. His clothes were dirty, torn, and he held a knife in one shaking hand. Chuck didn't move. "It's us, Miguel. It's Denzel. And me. You remember." Reese blinked, lowering the knife slowly. "You don't understand. They're coming. They followed me. They followed you." Denzel stepped forward. "Who's coming?" Reese pointed toward the ridge behind them. "Them. The ones in the photos. The ones in the files. Black vans. No plates. They don't wear badges. They erase people." Before they could ask more, an engine roared in the distance. Not one, but two. Then three. Headlights flashed through the trees. Reese dropped the knife. "Run," he said. But it was too late. Black SUVs burst into the clearing, engines growling, doors flying open. Men in tactical gear spilled out, weapons raised. Chuck grabbed Reese and pulled him behind a fallen log. Denzel ducked next to them. "Move now," Chuck ordered. "We split and regroup at the creek." Denzel nodded. They darted through the trees, dodging gunfire that cracked like lightning behind them. The forest became a maze, branches slapping their faces, mud sucking at their boots. Denzel could hear the heavy steps of men behind them, trained, fast, but not fast enough. They were being hunted. Chuck reached the creek first, motioning for the others to dive in. The cold water hit like a punch to the chest, but it muffled their trail. They waded down the stream, hidden by rocks and the roar of water. After what felt like forever, they climbed out into a thick patch of brush. All three were soaked, freezing, but alive. Reese collapsed onto the ground, coughing. "They'll keep coming," he said. Chuck looked at Denzel. "We need to know what's in those files." Reese pulled a flash drive from a pouch tied around his waist. "Everything's on here. Names, dates, places. They thought I deleted it. I didn't." Denzel took it, eyes wide. "We get this to the right hands, we expose them." Chuck scanned the forest behind them. "Then we'd better move fast." The three men crouched beneath the brush, soaked and shaking from the icy creek, but their eyes were wide open. The flash drive Reese had handed over seemed small, but it pulsed with weight. A different kind of danger now surrounded them. This wasn't just about a missing veteran anymore. This was bigger. Denzel clutched the flash drive in his palm like it was a live wire. He looked over at Reese, who lay on his back, breathing hard but steady. Chuck stood watch, eyes scanning the forest line, muscles still tight, always ready. The SUVs were gone for now. Whoever those men were, they hadn't expected a fight. But they'd be back. And next time, they wouldn't just come armed, they'd come to erase all traces. Denzel finally spoke. "What's on here?" Reese sat up, wiping mud from his face. I worked in logistics during my last tour, he said. After I got injured, they moved me to a desk job. One day, I was doing a routine file review, just cleaning up records. I found a folder I wasn't supposed to see. Names I recognized. Soldiers, contractors, even civilians. All marked deceased. But they weren't dead. I'd seen them. Talked to them. Some as recent as a week before. Chuck frowned. Witness protection. Reese shook his head. No. These people weren't relocated. They were disappeared. And not by enemies. By our own people. The forest was still around them. The wind had died down. Not even the trees made a sound. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath. Reese continued. It wasn't just missing people. It was missions that didn't exist. Black ops run under false names, with no oversight. Files showed movement of weapons and supplies into places we weren't supposed to be. And it all pointed back to one division. A private group working inside the government. Not official. No badges. No accountability. Denzel looked at Chuck. You ever heard of something like that? Chuck nodded slowly. Once. Long time ago. Thought it was just rumor. Reese said, when I asked about the files, I was told I'd made a mistake. They pulled me from my desk and sent me home. No follow-up. Just silence. But I knew then I was being watched. Phones tapped. My house broken into but nothing stolen. That's when I ran. Chuck asked, and the flash drive? Reese pointed to his chest. Made a copy before they locked me out. Took weeks to piece it all together, but everything I saw, it's all there. Coordinates, dates, lists. Enough to make someone sweat. Denzel turned the drive over in his fingers. You were hoping someone would come looking. Reese nodded. I knew the only two people I could trust would. You both have dirt under your nails. You know what they hide. Chuck exhaled. We can't go back the way we came. We're being tracked. Reese added, there's an old ranger station up north. Still has a radio. We can send a signal from there. Denzel agreed. And after that? Chuck gave a thin smile. Then we run again. Or we fight. They made their way through the trees, cold and quiet, moving like ghosts. Each step forward was a risk, but stopping was worse. Every sound, snapping twigs, crunching leaves, felt louder than it should. After nearly 2 hours of careful travel, the ranger station came into view. It stood crooked, leaning to one side, forgotten by the world. But the radio tower still rose above the trees, its top blinking red like a beacon. They entered through the back. The air inside was stale, filled with dust and old wood. Reese found the radio in a corner, covered with a top. He plugged in the drive and began transmitting the files on a secure loop. Denzel stood near the door, watching the forest. Chuck moved through the room checking windows, placing broken chairs against entry points like makeshift alarms. Then they waited. For a while, nothing happened. The hum of the radio filled the silence. Then a light on the console blinked. Someone had received the signal. Denzel asked, that good or bad? Reese looked unsure. Both. Someone knows now. But we don't know who. Outside, a distant rumble returned. Not tires this time, helicopter blades. The trees began to sway. Searchlights pierced through the canopy. Denzel clenched his jaw. They're not giving up. Chuck reached under the table and pulled out a small black pouch. Inside were smoke grenades, road flares, and a backup radio. He handed Denzel the drive. Get this to someone you trust. Denzel took it without a word. Reese stood slowly. I started this. I'll hold them off. Chuck turned sharply. No, you won't. We move together. But Reese shook his head. I've been running long enough. Let me buy you time. The sound of boots and shouts echoed closer. No more choices. Just instinct. Chuck and Denzel moved out the back, vanishing into the trees. Behind them, Reese stayed. Minutes later, the ranger station exploded in a fireball. The force shook the trees. Denzel stopped and turned back, fists clenched. Chuck rested a hand on his shoulder. He knew what he was doing. By dawn, they reached a main road. A truck passed and slowed. The driver rolled down his window. "You two lost?" Chuck looked at Denzel. Denzel said, "No. We're exactly where we need to be." He climbed into the truck. Chuck followed. In Denzel's pocket, the flash drive stayed safe. The world wouldn't be the same after this. Secrets had been exposed. But as the truck pulled away, neither man looked back. Some stories aren't about the past. They're about what comes next.